got on my bookshelf the most marvellous books. Good Market Gardening, published 1948. It's a British manual to small commercial growers, basically, but the emphasis being on vegetables and fruit. So it's very much of interest to any sort of gardener. Obviously, of the period, it was essential reading. But as times change and gardening does move on, it's good that it does move on. A lot of things have happened in the 35 years that I've been gardening to improve the things that we do. But stuff also gets lost. And flipping through the pages here is a fascinating look back at some things that we shouldn't have forgotten. For instance, from the pages here, soot, chimney soot, the most marvellous fertiliser, don't ever waste it. Full of nutrients for plants, and also a very good deterrent of greenfly, apparently. Another one, if you plant your early potatoes a little bit wider than usual, and when you finish the last cultivation, when you've earthed them up, plant Brussels sprouts up the centre. When the potatoes come out, the sprouts will make a most marvellous follow-on crop. Compost making. The heap doesn't need to be turned, providing it's big enough and well constructed. I'm going to flip through the pages now. You can peer over my shoulder and we'll try and pick out some more of these gems. This is wonderful stuff. So here we go. Good Market Gardening. Published by G.H. Towell, 1948. Good Market Gardening, or the Art of Commercial Horticulture. Illustrations. Loading manure can be hard work. There we go. It looks it, doesn't it? Chapter 1 begins with, obviously, because this is a book directed as much as anything at people that want to make a living out of it. The job as a career, but even this advice is rather wonderful. The author goes some pains to explain that it's for doers, not dreamers. A methodical approach and a realistic approach to life is going to get you in a much better frame of mind to be a market gardener. Essential characteristics. Prospects. Types of market gardening. The ideal holding, and so on. So this is perhaps not so useful to us, but this little bit is interesting. Essentials for success in the market gardening industry are surprisingly few. They are. 1. The man must be an organiser, not a muddler, and he must have plenty of drive, sometimes at the expense of his personal popularity. Well, that's the gardener in a nutshell. 2. The farm must be reasonably accessible to labour and markets. Number 3 is interesting as well. The soil must be reasonably workable throughout the year, that is, not too heavy. Choice of farms. Aspect. The matter of aspect is unimportant. Relatively, it is unimportant compared with the essentials. It is commonly held that the market garden holding must slope to the south, yet some of the best fields and some of the most fertile land in the country is inclined to the north. The author's present farm all slopes to the north, and yet it has already proved capable of yielding produce of first-class quality. Question of wind. Exposure to wind is perhaps the worst feature of land which has no southern aspect. There is a general tendency for market gardeners to do away with trees and hedges, and in districts where several such holdings are adjacent to one another, there may be large stretches of land, embracing some hundreds of acres on which not a single hedge or fence can be seen. There is no more damaging element to a growing crop than wind and frost, and that is what you are liable to get from the north. So in selecting a holding, protection from this aspect is important. Existing barriers should be taken into account, or alternatively, fresh windbreaks considered. For very large fields where early intensive cropping is practiced, intersection may be effaced by the planting of hedges of such things as lilac, petisporum, or other shrubs. Water. In all districts, with the possible exception of the extreme southwest and northwest areas, the position concerning water should be investigated. Intensive forms of market gardening demand large quantities of water. It goes on to recommend finding a small holding with a river or a spring, a borehole, and as a last resort, piped water. Previous occupation. Some knowledge of the past history of the contemplative farm is valuable to the newcomer. That the farm should not have been gardened at any rate for some years prior to the time of viewing is an advantage in that insofar as there is less likelihood of the incomer inheriting soil-borne troubles. If the land comprises a fair proportion of old pasture, this will stand a beginner in good stead in the building-up years, for the stored-on fertility can be drawn upon for several years with judicious cropping till organic manures can be applied. In old pasture, however, the wireworm population is often very high, and cropping for the first 2 or 3 years will necessarily have to take this into account. Many farms which have been mainly arable for a considerable time are, so far as market gardening is concerned, farmed out. A long series of straw crops with only an occasional bare fallow interspersed by way of a rest leaves a poverty-stricken state of affairs quite unsuitable for vegetable growing. Climate. The search for a holding may be limited to a certain district owing to family ties, local connections, or knowledge of special climatic or soil conditions. Generally speaking, it may be said that the drier districts are more suitable for vegetable production, especially salad production, since it is more likely that there will be a greater number of hours of day sunlight than in wetter areas. The soil. The soil is perhaps the first most fundamental item to be investigated. A good soil for easy working and rapid growth is rather sandy, preferably with a rather heavier subsoil. Such subsoils as gravel and chalk are too hungry and not sufficiently retentive of moisture in dry weather. The best soils are usually found on the deep alluvial deposits, such as those found overlying lower greensand rocks. Small scattered pockets of soil hugging the rivers are often laid down to meadows. Here you may have soils somewhat sandy in texture, but dark in colour, and so more capable of absorbing more heat from the sun's rays than the soil of a lighter colour, and mellow in nature, frequently provided with large reserves of humus and furnished with a high water table. Medium loams, as likely as not, will more frequently be available to those in search of the right field, and where these have a minimum depth of 15 inches or more above such a material as chalk or clay, these may be converted by cultivation and manuring into suitable soil for market gardening. It is a great advantage to be able to get onto the land a few hours after rain, and this can only be done with impunity on well-drained deep loams or still lighter soils. This is important since the market gardener frequently has crops which require hoeing quite late in the autumn and again early in the spring, a practice which cannot be entertained on the stiffer soils. Clay soil, being intractable, slow to warm up, and a difficult material on which to get a tilth, is not suitable for vegetable growing and should not be chosen. Soil improvement. Good drainage. Land which is wet is cold and lifeless and quite unsuitable to attempt to work. Wet fields or parts thereof should be thoroughly investigated. Existing drains may be found to be blocked, and ditches may have been trodden in by cattle or become overgrown with vegetation and silted up above the outlets of drains. If, after repair work has been done, the land still remains wet, then it is necessary to take levels and lay more tile drains to the nearest outlet. First cultivation. In the ordinary course of events, the first cultivation will be ploughing. In the case of old arable land, the soil will probably not have been deeply worked for a good many years, and ploughing 10 inches to 12 inches deep, providing there is adequate depth of soil, will work wonders. If this initial ploughing is effected early in the autumn months, it is usually possible to plough again during the winter or early spring, this time crossing the work, perhaps less deeply, obtaining a clean finish ready for surface cultivations in the spring. Dealing with turf. Generally speaking, unless it has been possible to kill the grass in the summer by early ploughing, shallow and subsequent cultivation and dicing, then it is best to use the turnall and plough to a depth of 10 inches or thereabouts and let the winter weather do the breaking down. But see that the turf is all buried, or the remnants will prove a nuisance to spring surface cultivations and make marking out for planting difficult and often well nigh impossible. Cleaning of new ground. It is most unlikely that an ingoing occupier of agricultural land will find every field sufficiently free from bad perennial weeds to crop intensively. Consequently, some fallowing may be necessary the first year, or if not too foul with twitch, we call it couch grass, and the like, and a crop which lends itself to much interrow work, such as potatoes or Brussels, may be planted. On the other hand, a fallow may be persistently knocked about till about June or early July, after which winter cabbage or savoys may be planted. Incidentally, the weeds observed in abundance on land give a fair indication of the soil conditions obtaining. For instance, an abundance of twitch means general lack of or poor cultivation. In very bad infestations with this weed, nothing but repeated ploughing and cultivating in dry weather, rolling the twitch off with pitch pole harrows and burning will eradicate it. Creeping buttercup, mare's tail and Passacia found in patches are indicators of bad drainage. Manures and manuring. The materials added to the soil by man, whether organic or inorganic in nature, are introduced either for plant food or soil amelioration, some having the effect of improving the soil structure whilst at the same time supplying plant food. For example, lime and dung. Here are the principles on which you should reflect. First, that on average arable land, which is what you will probably have to start on, bulky organic manures such as farmyard manure, compost and sewage must be applied with fair regularity if you are to produce crops of good quality, able to withstand adverse growing conditions such as drought and greenfly. I add greenfly merely as an example of a common general pest which is notably more harmful and more plentiful on a crop stunted in growth. Muck, in some form or another, is the means of modifying a given soil into a more suitable medium for plant growth. Moreover, beside it carries actual plant food in different quantities according to its origin and use. By the use of muck, heavy soils are rendered more tractable and better aired, while lighter land is made more retentive of moisture. The actual structure may be detected by its tread by the experienced, or by the manner in which it crumbles in the palm of the hand. Very light sandy soil is noticeably darkened, a good feature since dark soils are warmer, by heavy applications of farmyard manure, a property that may be further advanced by the addition of soot. There is, moreover, something in farmyard manure, or its nearest equivalent in sewage or compost, which enhances the quality of fresh salads and vegetables grown upon the land to which heavy applications have been regularly added, to an extent which has an economic value as well as the improvement in taste or appearance. Whether or not in their natural habitat, the vegetable plants that we eat have an ample admixture of humus. Certain it is that under the semi-artificial conditions under which the good market gardener grows them, they not only thrive and wax lush, but also, in the presence of ample organic matter, suffer less from pests and diseases. It goes on to consider the quantity that one should apply, recommending that something between 10 to 60 tonnes to the acre is a good quantity. It talks a little bit here about crops on ploughed up grassland. A number of crops do quite well for a year or two on ploughed up grassland with merely a general fertiliser mixture, the decomposing turf supplying the necessary humus. It is useful to know these crops so that what dung is available may be put at the disposal of the crops that most need it, or that give the best return by it. For instance, marrows and rhubarb, both gross feeders, able to assimilate all the manure available, will give an abundant crop in such circumstances. So will peas with adequate consolidation, and also Brussels sprouts and parsnips. Making compost. Talking about doing it on a farm scale, but this bit is quite interesting. Turning the heap is not essential. The important thing is to put it down evenly and not too tight in the case of baled straw, and not too loose or heat will escape, and get it properly damped right through. Let the heap be deep enough too, from 6 inches to 10 feet when settled. Straw purchased for this purchase should be free from dock, thistle and charlock as far as possible. Other materials such as bank and hedge trimmings, old bags, vegetable waste, potato and tomato hulls, so long as they are free from disease, may all be added to the straw base. Soot, though not bulky in character when applied, may be considered under the category of humus. Soot has a number of very valuable properties. It is lasting. Green crops in particular will give evidence of an application of 1 tonne per acre for 5 years or more. Repeated applications have the effect of darkening the soil, thus rendering it warmer and perhaps more mellow. In addition, it is a nitrogenous fertilizer and a strong deterrent of such insect pests as greenfly and celery fly. Seaweed is a valuable form of humus near to the coast, where it can be carted cheaply. Owing to its buoyant nature, it has been found greatly to improve the structure of shaly land, such as found in parts of Cornwall. It also adds potash to the soil. Chapter 3 covers mechanisation. Now he talks about the replacement of horses with tractors and different types of tooling that the farmer can use. This is of little interest to us as gardeners, so I'll skip through this one. Planning and methods of cropping, Chapter 4. The novice will at once ask, which are the best crops to grow? The answer depends on several things. The size of the holding, for instance, may be a limiting factor. A very small holding would be best cropped intensively rather than, say, with potatoes and Brussels sprouts. A very small holding should produce small strips of high-class fruit, flowers and vegetables, and a retail outlet should be established. A grower with a considerable acreage of, say, 30 to 200 acres may be guided by what he likes growing to a certain extent, but more upon what pays best, which is his bread and butter, and also upon his method of marketing. Permanent crops. Those crops which are calculated to be on the ground for periods varying from 4 to 10 years or more should be planted on land which is clean, deeply cultivated and in thoroughly good heart. Another point to be considered when planning out where permanent plantings are to go is accessibility for working. With rhubarb, for instance, which requires the minimum of inter-row cultivation, a comparatively inaccessible field might be chosen to advantage, other conditions being suitable. Other crops which may be down for periods of up to 10 years or more are asparagus, blackcurrants, strawberries and other bush and tree fruits. It should be emphasised, however, that on no account should these crops, yielding only one crop a year as they do, be dubbed less profitable and in consequence related to inferior land. Rotation. In market gardening, it is not usual to follow a very strict crop rotation. Some crops, such as Brussels, may be occupying the ground for 12 months, thus belating tillage operations and limiting the following crop to one which can be put in late in the spring or on newly ploughed land. Others are on the ground for only a few weeks and do not seriously take from the general fertility of the soil, and may therefore be followed by a similar or related crop. On the other hand, some few crops whose seasons of growth differ widely may be conveniently grouped into a simple rotation. For instance, main crop beetroot, after spring cabbage, then early peas, followed by winter cabbage or leeks. Whilst it will usually be found that at least 2 crops of any sort may be taken in succession if the ground is ready in time, and provided there is freedom from disease, it is only common sense to spread crops of the same type as widely as possible in order to prevent soil exhaustion. Of course, another reason why crop rotation is not quite so vital on the market gardening is that manuring is necessarily more heavy all round and replenishments more regular. Intercropping. When starting on a small scale, there is an obvious advantage in practicing a certain amount of intercropping in order to make the most of all available ground. Such well-known examples as dwarf beans and lettuce between celery, radish and New Zealand spinach, cauliflower and lettuce, early potatoes and Brussels sprouts speak for themselves in land utilisation. But as the holding increases, there's always a tendency to spread the crops separately into broad strips or even whole fields of one crop, thus facilitating cultivations and enabling a more complete system of mechanisation. And then now follows several chapters devoted to particular crops. Beginning, of course, with potatoes. Main crop potatoes are principally a farm crop. Early potatoes are a market garden crop. Many growers produce both. A few farmers grow also some earlies. As mentioned in a foregoing chapter, it is nice to be able to grow all one's own wares when trading direct in the shops, but this is seldom achieved, particularly in regard to main crop potatoes, since each lorry will handle some hundreds of tons in one winter. No crop more abundantly responds to farmyard manure than potatoes. An acre well dunged is capable of yielding as much and of better quality than may be produced on 5 acres of impoverished or ordinary farmland to which no manure has been applied. The potato crop is often spoken of and recommended as a good cleaning crop for dirty land which is foul of both annual and perennial weeds. It must be clearly understood that this does not mean that the weed crop is simply smothered out of existence by the rampant potato harm, rather that the extra cultivations preparative and subsequent to planting are designed to give the potato crop the best chance, are so thorough and persistent that a dirty field is vacated in so much better heart and comparatively free from pernicious weeds. On well-manured market garden land, a yield of 10 or 12 tonnes per acre is not unusual. Early potatoes, being a crop which occupies the ground for only a few months, require much more exacting soil conditions. Generally speaking, only the early lighter sandy soils are suitable for early potatoes. On late land and with northerly aspects, they are not worthwhile. New potatoes grown on their own are usually planted 2 feet between the rows. In intensive market gardening, however, a popular practice is to plant Brussels sprouts between the rows after the final cultivation has been completed. In this case, at least 2 foot 6 inches and preferably 3 foot should be allowed between the rows of potatoes when planting, otherwise the Brussels will be cramped when nearing maturity. Carrots. The crop does not demand such exacting conditions as some, though great variations in yields are obtained from soils of different types. Heavy manuring is not essential, but it is important that the soil should be in good heart and that it should contain enough humus to conserve moisture, which prevents splitting of the carrots in period of drought come rain. A bad strain of seed will produce a high percentage of bolters with both early and main crop carrots, and the dates for drilling are equally important in successful carrot growing. Parsnips. Parsnips are not among the most profitable crops for a smallholder. They occupy the land for a long time. On the other hand, with a good depth of soil, they are quite easy to grow. The deep black soils, such as are found in the fens, produce an excellent type of parsnip. Beetroot. Beetroot grows well on a variety of soils, say from loamy sands to silty clay loams, but the latter makes lifting heavy work and is only on really light sandy soils that the early market of a bunched beet can be captured to the best advantage. It is important not to drill beet too early, as such a practice induces bolting, particularly in the globe varieties. In dry weather, several precautions should be taken at drilling time to ensure a good plant. The land should be carefully prepared on the day of drilling to avoid loss of moisture. By a series of surface cultivations, it should be worked to a fine level tilth, but thoroughly solid underneath. In addition, it is a good thing to immerse the seed in water 12 hours prior to drilling in order to sprout the fruitlets and hasten germination. Turnips. Here is a gamble if ever there was one. From 1st April till the end of July, white turnips may be drilled or broadcast, but in dry weather it is touch and go whether you get a plant, and they are never really safe from flea beetle, even after they have obtained the rough leaf stage. Moreover, with the April sowings, there is always a risk of sharp spring frosts, for turnips are tender seedlings whilst in the 2-leaf stage. Swedes. The quality of Swedes varies a great deal according to the season. A quick season of growth favours quality, but a very wet season induces mildew, especially after a temporary drought. On to brassicas. Cabbage. A succession of cabbage is maintained by raising the first batch of primo seedlings, either in a cold house or in cold frames. These are transplanted in April and cutting commences at the end of June. Successive sowings of summer and autumn varieties such as Standby, Winnigstadt and Utility are made in the open and followed by Christmas drumhead, Savoys and king cabbage types in May. Finally, in the latter part of July, a drilling in situ of first early market, spring cabbage, is made and later followed by the main crop, pointed cabbage such as Offanem, in a plant bed ready for setting out in October. If the supply of other cabbage comes to an end, this crop may be cut first as greens and the remainder as spring cabbage from February to the end of April. Good-hearted cabbage cannot be produced on loose, unprepared land, and it is important thoroughly to prepare the surface before planting to ensure adequate consolidation. Many a cabbage plot has failed to produce hardy cabbage on an allotment or a private garden owing to lack of consolidation. Similarly, cabbage suffers worse in small protected plots from caterpillar than on an open field, probably owing to the sheltered conditions. Brussels sprouts. One of the most reliable winter main crops is Brussels sprouts, for here you have a remunerative crop marketable from September to March. The greatest snags in Brussels production are, in my opinion, fly in the summer and wood pigeons in the winter. A good rain when fly is prevalent is the best cure, but soot is also a healthy deterrent. As for wood pigeons, well, the less said the better, for the language in this book. You may think they are of no importance until the first week of really hard weather. Then one morning you will find them in their hundreds on a field of spring cabbage or the barren stems of Brussels, and the irreparable damage is done. Cauliflower. The cauliflower, especially the summer cauliflower, is the most difficult brassica crop to bring to perfection, which is more exacting in soil, manure and general cultivation requirements than those already dealt with. There are no secrets attached to the successful production of this crop, but the main factors leading to good crops are heavy dressings of farmyard manure, plenty of water, good strain of seed and good planting. Thereafter a quick growth period free from checks. Broccoli. Broccoli or winter cauliflower are seldom a success north of London, except in the case of very late spring flowering varieties, and it is questionable whether even these are worth the ground they stand on on an intensive holding. For 3 years out of 5, the severity of the winter reduces the number of bed heads to a minority. Onions and leeks. The ground for onions must be adequately prepared. Autumn tillage is the best, ploughing deeply and ploughing in dung up to 30 tonnes per acre. When the weather opens in February or March, disc or tying the surface down to a fine tilth. Roll till the ground is really solid to work upon and drill 10 to 12 inches apart and roll in. Very small areas may be planted with seedlings raised previously in trays or frames, but commercially the usual procedure is to drill direct, thinning out later if the rows are too crowded. Leeks. Leeks are among the easiest crops to grow in a big way. They suffer from few pests and diseases and will grow on any soil that is in good heart. For a good yield in weight per acre, you must get them planted out in time so that they've had at least 6 weeks of summer growth. That means planting should be completed by mid-July. It also means that unless overhead water can be administered during that period of growth, the plants may practically stand still until the autumn, when the tonnage per acre will be negligible. Leeks are gross feeders, responding very heavily to heavy manuring. Subsequent cultivations after planting and lifting will cost the same whether the leeks are as thick as your wrist or as thin as a lead pencil, so obviously it will pay to observe the simple necessities of weight production. Legumes. Peas, always a gamble. Peas in a field become ready for picking overnight, as it were, and once they reach the optimum stage of fullness in the pod, they must be gathered in hot weather, whatever the trend of the market may be. It is very uncertain what sort of a yield of pods you get when you drill, especially with earlies, for a spring frost will set them back and thin the blooms. Similarly, a main crop drilling may set well but fail to swell in the pod due to drought. Very early varieties sown in February or early March should not be charged on low-lying farms as they are more liable to frost damage. It is far more profitable in the long run to wait and drill a main crop a month later and be sure of a crop. The ground for peas should be well consolidated, and a field is best drilled in strips at weekly or fortnightly intervals to procure a succession and enable these to be picked by a reasonable sized gang. Broad beans. A crop which will grow well on most soils and prefers a heavy one, which can be sown in November or February and March, seldom fails to pod up, but always suffers from blackfly unless the tops are removed in time. The yield per acre is not large. Runner beans. The scarlet runner has a short season of growth, liable to be clipped each end by the merest hint of frost. Runner beans are rather sensitive to soil conditions, irrespective of manuring. Some fields suit them and others result in failure. They do not do well on chalky or very loose soil. To get good yields, runners should be picked hard and regularly. If beans are allowed to hang, they soon grow tough and hard and cease to flower so profusely. Crops. Salads. The best salad produce comes from crops which have been grown rapidly, free from checks to seed to maturity, and every facility and practice must be afforded the crop with this end in view. It is useless to attempt to grow these highly sensitive crops in impoverished soil or upon ordinary farmland. Land which is very stony, very clayey, or very chalky is quite unsuitable for salad production. Moreover, since earliness in the spring and lateness in the autumn are factors on which extended continuity depends, the choice of land is limited to holdings which are relatively free from frost pockets. Bridge cucumbers. It is the most aggravating crop to attempt to grow. In mid-April, it may be too dry to drill for good germination, so you wait for rain. Then a cold wet spell may follow, resulting in about 1% germinating. After waiting 10 days for more to push through, you have to decide whether to plough in and reseed, as a result of which you are late. A dull wet June results in no growth at first, followed by rampant extension and chronic mildew. A very dry summer starts off well, but also induces mildew if water cannot be applied. Lettuce. The aim of the salad specialist is to have lettuce fit to cut every month of the year. This can only be achieved with the aid of glass in one form or another. The outdoor crop of cabbage lettuce is secured in cut between the middle of May and Christmas by means of successive sowings. The first sowing is made in cold frames in late October and overwintered till March, when the lettuces are transplanted. From March to August, seed is drilled and the rows singled, as planting in hot weather is unsuccessful. In September, planting is again favoured for the crop to stand in the winter, turning in March-April, just prior to the first spring planted crop. The gap between December and mid-March is filled by heated glasshouse crops, and the French garden and cold frame plantings mature in March, April and May to complete the cycle. Crops, soft fruit and others. Blackcurrants. Blackcurrants are perhaps the most favoured bush fruit for the general market gardener and will fit in well as a permanent crop on land which is too heavy for very early work. Beware, however, of frost pockets, for it is the late spring frosts which in one night very often reduce all the year's work to nothing. Strawberries. The art in successful strawberry growing lies in starting off with a certified stock, doing the plantation well, roguing systematically for virus, and so on, and replanting every 4th year. Rhubarb. It will grow on almost any type of soil which is rich, well drained and in good heart. Given optimum conditions, it is highly prolific. The early varieties, brought on by covering the crowns with straw, yielding 3 to 10 tonnes per acre. The later, main crop, being larger growers, pulling to the tune of 20 to 30 tonnes per acre. Glass and intensive cropping. And he goes on talking about the things we know, glass houses for propagation and cropping, how to manage glass houses, the use of frames, protection. Talks here about cropping with frames, what he calls French gardening. The beginner is advised to commence with quite a modest number, learn how to use them and add to them by means of the profit made. The aim should be to eventually have an area of frames large enough to not only capture but also hold the market in early lettuce, radish, turnips and carrots. And then follows a chapter on marketing, how to pack, get your produce ready, how to deal with competition, how to set up cooperatives, how to run a market garden as a farm, a little interesting chapter here on health in plants. Certain chemical elements are needed by all crops, though in a different degree according to the type of crop. Nitrogen, for instance, is one of the principal elements concerned with growth, and whilst all crops may need some nitrogen, it is natural that the leafy crops such as brassicas need it in greater proportion than, say, parsnips. Phosphorus promotes root growth and is valuable in raising the seedling and in ripening the seed. Potassium is vital for its influence in the colouring and quality of fruit and in assisting the plant to resist certain diseases. Causes of ill health. The late spring frost may severely cut back brassica seedlings so that growth is slow and the flea beetle has the advantage of feeding upon a retarded host. Drought, severely slowing up the growth of lettuces, brings risk of damage by greenfly. A cold wind may bring the danger of damage by the same pest as is favoured by the check in growth. Wind has other predisposing effects. Much damage is sometimes done on the light land by sand blowing, the foliage and stems of young crops being severely bruised, with the resulting check and a lowering of virility. Similarly, hail damage may be devastating in external injury, particularly to fruits and broadleaf crops, such as ridge cucumbers and mallows, and also to young seedlings just through the ground. Finally, the most obvious cause of ill health is the direct external damage by animals and plant enemies of crops. The business side, how to run a farm. Let's look after your workforce. A little summary at the end. A farmer's first duty is to the land, his second duty is to his neighbour, and both will reap for him his real reward. That is my creed, and may it be yours.